Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening if you are listening in real time or eons in the future through the miracle of electronic preservation. Peter Robbins here. The show is Meanwhile Here on Earth. And every once in a while, I have a guest on who is not necessarily an experiencer or a UFO witness, or they are somebody in the field who reports on it, who chronicles events, who collects stories, who also carries a older tradition with them of real radio. Some of you don't even remember what that is. It's like we're doing right now, but there's no pictures. I know. It's a lot to take in. The pictures form in your head. And several weeks ago, myself and my guest, Dave Schrader, had a chance to spend part of a great weekend together at the Bucks County, Pennsylvania Paracon, ironically occurring just over the border in neighboring state of New Jersey. But I realized over dinner on our last night that this man needed to be a guest on our show here. Dave Schrader is a longtime radio host who has spent many years delving deeply into the realms of the strange, the fringe, and the bizarre. In 2006, he and his co-host Tim Dennis launched Darkness Radio, which went on to become a highly popular radio show. Dave became a regular fill-in host for George Noory on Coast to Coast AM, and now hosts Midnight in the Desert as well, formerly hosted by radio legend Art Bell. He is co-author of the book The Other Side, A Teen's Guide to Ghost Hunting and the Paranormal. He was the lead judge on the Travel Channel's hit miniseries Paranormal Challenge and has appeared on screen on the Travel Channel's #1 series Ghost Adventures numerous times. Paranormal State also on A&E and Haunted Hospitals, among other programs and series. Dave also worked behind the scenes on Ghost Adventures for 3 years at a location as a location scout and researcher. Originally from Illinois, Dave has been a resident of Minnesota since 1988, when he attended Winona State College and fell in love with the beauty and people of the great state. With the growing interest in the world of the unknown on TV, film, and literature building each day, Dave decided to bring his unique views and experiences to the radio as the host of Darkness Radio. Dave has had an active interest in the paranormal since early in his childhood, when he was visited by the spirit of his deceased grandmother. Continued activity and experiences has kept this passion alive. And Dave Schrader, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth, my friend.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Peter. It's a pleasure.
A pleasure to be had. Okay. Anything exciting happened since I saw you last?
Well, I just did an event out at the Palmer House Hotel in Sauk Center, Minnesota. And I was there with medium Scott Davis and Sarah Lemos. And we did a full weekend investigation of this place with about 35 of our closest friends and listeners. And we had a great time. I really wanted people to kind of experience paranormal investigations in a different way. So we did a full-on investigation on Saturday night, as you normally would. On Friday night, we kind of leaned more into the sensing and intuitive nature of our being. So everybody got to go around, no talking for 2 hours, just with notepads, writing impressions that they picked up on in certain rooms. What did they see? What did they sense? What did they smell? Any kind of pictures come to mind? And then afterwards, we all met and talked about each room and would see how many people had similar experiences. And it was really, really amazing to see how many people had the exact same impressions, ideas, spiritual activity occur to them while they were in these rooms, but separate and at different times.
Tell us a little about the venue here. The Palmer House is quite an historic hotel, isn't it?
Well, there's the famous Palmer House in Chicago, which everybody knows about and sometimes mistake for the Palmer House in Sauk Center. But for Minnesota, it is a very historic site. It originally was the Sauk Center House back in the late 1800s. It burned down right around the turn of the century, last century, that is, and was rebuilt on the same footprint in 1901. And it had many different lives as a hotel. You know, I mean, one of the biggest places in the area, and it had an underground storage area. So when the big influenza break hit, they would store some of the bodies there in the basement until it
1918.
until it was warm enough to start digging up the ground and you know, putting people to rest.
Sure.
It had burned down and there were some deaths throughout there. It was a working brothel at one point and most likely a speakeasy. And so it's got a sordid history, but now it's a beautiful little fun boutique hotel.
Yeah.
But the spirits refuse to leave, Peter.
Dave, let's start at the beginning. I know you said that you became involved through an interaction or in paranormal studies, awareness, with an interaction or an awareness of your deceased grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
First, you're originally from Illinois. Did you grow up in a rural area or in city, Chicago or other?
I was 22 miles west of Chicago in a town called Medina, Illinois. That's where I spent the majority of my youth from about 4.5 until I moved out at 18. But yeah, my grandmother had passed away when I was very young, about 2.5 years old. And she, I was the only boy in her life, right? She had 2 daughters and I was the first boy. So I was like a son to my grandmother and grandfather as well. And my mom was only 20 at the time. And so had this great connection. And then when she passed and I would be dropped off at my grandfather's house to spend the night while my mom was out on a date or out doing fun things, she would come to pick me up in the morning and I would talk about how grandma came back to visit me, and she would read me stories or, hold my hand and talk to me. And mom just was sure I was just dreaming about my grandmother, but I would start getting specific about things. Like one of the last times I talked about how funny she wears a polka dot dress, but she doesn't have all of her teeth and she's not wearing shoes. And that was enough weirdness for my mom's curiosity to be piqued. And she talked to my aunt, who still lived with my grandfather. She was a teenager at the time. And she said, Judy, Dave keeps dreaming about mom. And she goes, well, what do you mean? She goes, well, every time I come to pick him up, and he never says it when we're at our apartment, but when he's here, she comes in to talk to him, to read to him. And this last time he talked about her being in a polka dot dress. And I've never seen her in a polka dot dress. He also mentioned she didn't have all of her teeth and she was barefoot. And my aunt kind of was shocked because my grandmother didn't look like my grandmother when she passed away. She had kind of withered down from cirrhosis and from an aneurysm. So she was buried in a closed casket. My grandfather had tasked my aunt with picking out an outfit. So my aunt went out and got her a polka dot dress, dropped her off with my grandfather, who took it to the mortician, and they buried her in it. So nobody had seen my grandmother out of the coffin. But I was able to specifically explain it. And my aunt told my mom, Terry, they removed mom's teeth for burial. And I guess it's a well-known fact, they don't bury you with your shoes on. So, I don't know how I'm going to get around as a zombie without shoes, Peter. I need to have shoes when I'm buried. So it's in my will. But yeah, my grandmother, I detailed these facts, and turns out the room I slept in when I went to visit my grandfather was my grandmother's room. They loved each other, but they slept in separate rooms because my grandfather snored like a chainsaw going through glass bottles. So she slept at the other end of the hall, down the hall from my grandfather, but that's the room I always slept in when I went to visit.
Dave, do you remember how old you were when you put these components of what you're saying together as a kid and realized this is not standard? This is not something I think that happens to other kids. This is not something maybe not to talk about a lot. It's one thing to have those pieces come together as a kid. It's another thing to go, hang on,
Right.
What just for you, how did that kind of come
I don't
together?
I don't know that there was ever an aha moment. I mean, it was always kind of around me, and my mom was a voracious reader, and she read the Amityville Horror and books by Hans Holzer and Ed and Lorraine Warren and everybody. So there were always books around. So, and I've had a very active and lively imagination my whole life. So, having weird things happen in the house, but having my mom and dad corroborate that they also were hearing and seeing things, it just was kind of par for the course. It was never anything frightening or terrifying. You'd be upstairs and you'd hear somebody downstairs. You'd go downstairs and there's nobody there. Then my bedroom became the downstairs, and I'd be down there and I'd hear my mom and dad walking around, and I'd go up to talk to them and they wouldn't be home. So we always kind of had those type of things. They were very basic, nothing terrifying, but we were just aware of this being a part of our life. I had seen some things growing up, had a weird ghost experience walking to a friend of my house during broad daylight, where I saw a man standing inside his picture window looking out at me. And this was, around 1978. And Peter, we didn't have 20,000, TV channels to choose from. We didn't have a cell phone to sit there and doom scroll through. So we used to look out the window at our neighbors mowing the lawn, washing their cars. Yeah, I know, it's hard to believe. That was the ultimate reality TV shows, Peter. So I was walking by, I didn't think anything of it. And I took a few more steps and I just glanced back. And now I realized he's outside the house. And he's in front of the row of hedges now that are separating between his front window and the sidewalk. And my brain was trying to process this. I was an 11, 12-year-old boy at the time. And I'm like, maybe I just didn't see it right. So I glanced back one more time, and now he's in the middle of the yard standing there staring at me. And he wasn't running. There was no sound of footfalls through the grass. He wasn't huffing and puffing. And literally my brain just kept breaking. I'm like, what am I witnessing? And I turned one more time, and he was about 2 feet away from me on the corner of his property. And boom, I took off running. And that was it for me. I took the long way home for years. I just turned 57 this last November. When I go visit my dad, I still drive around the long way so I don't have to pass that creepy house. But there was nothing scary about that. But it was so disarming. I knew what I was seeing. I couldn't make sense of it. And later on found out that Christmas, the father had a massive heart attack and died in front of the picture window inside the house. So I never knew about the death, but I saw him popping around, and that was really unsettling to me as a kid, and still kind of gives me the willies as an adult. Although, like I said, there's nothing inherently frightening about what he did. Yeah. It was just, I couldn't understand what I was seeing.
Yeah. Dave, as you're putting this together as a young person, are you doing it in a manner where you're kind of challenging yourself to identify or explain the phenomena to yourself? In other words, there's just this kind of world of spooky, otherworldly stuff, and it kind of breaks through, and you connect with it. Maybe everybody is, or maybe it's just me and people like me, or what's happening is perfectly explainable in terms I can't understand. This is science of some sort. There's laws of physics that govern what I'm seeing, but I'm just completely unaware of them. Did you find yourself leaning into a more mystical or a more pragmatic attempt at explaining these things to yourself?
I think it was mostly, kind of accepting things on the face value, that it was weird. I remember I went to Trinity Lutheran grade school in Roselle, Illinois, and they had the books about Bigfoot and ghosts on the shelf. And, we also had to do Bible study, and there's ghosts and giants and monsters and people coming back from the dead and being healed. So, the supernatural was kind of acceptable because it was part of the religious factor I was being brought up under. So it doesn't mean I wouldn't get freaked out from time to time. When you're alone at home and you're a kid and you hear something in the dark moving around, it's unnerving. But I always had great support. My aunt was another voracious reader and very close to me. And so if I had ghosty questions or strange things, my mom and aunt always approached it in a way to not make it a fearful thing.
Good.
It would just be it's just, hey, Dave, what do you think happens after we die? I mean, we don't just stop. Do you think we just stop? You've seen grandma, you've had these experiences, and I just kind of accepted it. But I would go with my friend Rick, and we would, we were sure this woman, Mrs. Brown, that lived down the street was a witch because she had a brown house, and she always had the shades shut, and her doorbell had a half moon with a star on it.
I think that's proof enough.
Right. She had black cats. And what was so funny, Peter, as kids, we were always certain she was a witch. And as a 20, 21-year-old, my buddy Rick calls me one day and he goes, dude, so I'm driving by and Mrs. Brown waved me over and she asked if I could help mow the lawn because she was elderly at that time, like in her late 70s. And he goes, so I started to mow her lawn and the lawnmower got kind of jammed up. So I went in her garage. Dude, she had all of these brooms up against the wall. And we both started laughing. And he goes, so I took it and I brushed it out. And then I put the one that looked the most like a witch's broom in my trunk. And Dave, she couldn't see me. She didn't even go out in her garage. And as I was leaving, she said, oh, I'll need that broom back. And I was like, oh, man. So even as burgeoning adults, we were still tinkering on the edge of fear factor and still extrapolating out that it must be that she is a witch. And, that was just who it was. But listen, I grew up in a great era. I had the Hardy Boys mysteries. There was always some little twist to the stories. I grew up with Scooby-Doo and the Funky Phantom and Goober and the Ghost Chasers and the Ghostbusters and all of these shows, Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie and the Munsters and the Addams Family. So really, we grew up in a great time era because I was surrounded with the strange. And it was never anything that had to be weird, right? Yeah. When you think about what scary movies were, Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, real people, right, in these movies who just were evil and did evil things. That was more terrifying to me than, the ghosts and the things. And there was always an answer that was comfortable to confront when you unmasked, the old man Johnson down at the amusement park as the ghost night or whatever. So there was always a nice ending to those stories. So I think I was lucky to just grow up in a time where it was acceptable. And as kids, we were indoctrinated to it right away.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Tell me a little about your dad and what he did for a living.
So I'm lucky. I have two dads. I have the dad that raised me, Jim, and he's a construction worker out of Chicago, former construction worker, cement mason. And then just 5 years ago, I met my biological father, and he is a former Philadelphia cop. Yeah, so it was pretty neat. I've got two very strong men in my life, do two totally different types of jobs. But, what was kind of fascinating is I had gone through ancestry.com after my mom passed away. My cousin, who's big into genealogy, reached out and she said, your mom was going to do ancestry. I bought her a kit. Would you do it for her so we can open up more of our family history? Yeah. And she explained to me how these kits work. And I was, sure, I'll do it. And I spit in a vial, sent it off. And 3 weeks later, I get an alert and I found a daughter I didn't know I had. And I became close with her. And then a few years later, when I was on the set of the Holzer Files on Travel Channel and I was filming season 2, I got an email from Snarky Tea Company about the Ancestry.com results. And I thought, well, this sounds like a hoax email, an email about ancestry results from Snarky Tea. Turns out I have a little sister named Jenny who owns the Snarky Tea Company. And for our dad's birthday gift in November, they bought him a membership to Ancestry, and it came back I was his son. So we got to connect. We got to talk. And 2 days after that initial email, I got on the phone with my biological dad and he said, I got to tell you, son, I did a little research on you. He still has that cop in him. And he goes, and I went and I looked at your website and I looked at your Facebook page, and I'm not surprised that you are who you are. He said, your great-great-grandmother is a famous Scottish gypsy queen. My grandmother read tea leaves. My mother read tea leaves and cards. I read cards. Me and your siblings have all seen ghosts and have had experiences. So he said, so you were really born into this field. And wow, I'm not surprised that you do what you do. So that was really powerful.
Fascinating. And how wonderful to have these other familial doors open to you.
Right.
That's really a blessing. How wonderful.
Yeah, and I've had a chance to meet some of my siblings now. They've actually come out to some of the events in Philadelphia and New Jersey. As a matter of fact, my sister came out to that event to see me and hang out with me. So it's been a nice opening to connect with everybody.
That's great, Dave.
Yeah.
The the fact that you have ended up doing what you do and focused on the subjects that you are, I'm guessing when you were a boy, and thinking about, at a certain point, I'm going to be what they call an adult, and I need to zone in on something
Right.
to do like grown-ups do. Had you given much thought to a career or a type of job that you were thinking maybe this is what I should do?
So funny enough, as a kid, I wanted to be a cop. Right. So who knew? My biological father was a cop. But that shifted. I loved radio. Still love radio. But I
Let's
grew up
talk
in
about this.
Yeah, I grew up in Chicago, so I grew up with some legends on the radio at the time, Wally Phillips and Roy Leonard from WGN, Larry Lujak from WLS, Steve and Gary on the Loop, and Jonathan Brandmeier, and all of these great names. And as a kid, my buddy Rick and I, we would sit in the garage with our little black tape recorder we had from Kmart and our 3 blank cassettes you'd buy for 99 cents, and we would do old radio shows.
Oh, what fun.
Yeah, Hardy Boys Mysteries, and we would tell stories. And as I got older and I was like 11, 12, 13, I started calling these radio DJs and I would ask them questions. And sometimes they would call me back at home if they were like, "Hey, listen, I'm on the air. I can't talk. What's your phone number?" And my mom would call me from the living room and she's like, Larry Lujak is on the phone for you. And, here are these legends and they're taking my phone calls. And they were just so open to allowing me to pick their brains. So when I went off to college and found college radio, I continued calling them and they would still give me advice and tips and hints. And I always wanted to marry radio. I wanted that to be my focal point, but I was really good at sales. So I spent most of my life in sales, found college radio, did that for a few years, went back into the real world of sales. And then in January 1st of 2006, I re-entered radio and started Darkness Radio, and haven't looked back in 20 years. I've been doing some form of radio ever since. Darkness Radio. Then I was a fill-in host on Coast to Coast AM. I got to take over Art Bell's final show, Midnight in the Desert, when he passed away. And now I host the Paranormal 60 podcast and the Paranormal 360 radio show. So I just get to keep living this dream and traveling the world, meeting amazing people like you, hearing from experiencers, seeing these places firsthand for myself. So it's really been a blessing. But I feel like from a very early age, I have been putting this out to the universe, and the universe listened.
Yeah. You're getting to do something that most people really don't, which is work at something you're passionate about, that you're good about, that you are engaged by and in. And that's pretty special stuff.
Yeah.
As a byproduct of doing what you do, you become a repository for stories people share with you that they easily would not feel comfortable sharing with somebody else, even, and maybe especially with somebody that they know. We all, walk around with those stories in our head to a degree.
Right.
And knowing that when requested, we will always honor somebody's request to not share this. Or, you can tell the story if you want. Some of which, you've got time to fill. We both do each week. And so you're always on the lookout for content. At other times, it just supersedes and takes over, and the story has a life of its own. Let me ask you, in the world of paranormal studies, and you are in a pretty loaded part of the United States as far as paranormal activity, ghosts, Bigfoot type phenomena, but certainly in the world of UFO sightings and incredible cases. Do you remember the first time that subject of UFOs came into your field of vision of the idea of, geez, well, it's mainstay of science fiction, advanced machines from parts unknown coming and going with impunity under intelligent control.
Well, again, being a kid of the 70s and 80s, I grew up watching In Search of and Sightings and Unsolved Mysteries and all of those programs. But I really, my Uncle Bob, who has since passed, my dad, Jim, who raised me, his brother, he was really into this stuff. He loved it. As a matter of fact, my dad and uncle at one point were going to release a cereal called Mini Crop Circles, and they got sued by Kellogg's for using the word mini. Who knew that was a licensed word? So they love that stuff, and they would talk about these weird stories. So we would drive every year to Alabama to visit my grandparents for Thanksgiving, and we'd hear these stories. My uncle would be talking about stuff he's read or seen on these specials. So that was kind of the beginning for me. Of course, growing up watching My Favorite Martian and Mork from Ork and everything, it was always there, but not something that was as big to me as a spirit realm. Yeah. But my grandparents, I had kind of a twofold experience there. They owned 40 acres of property in Foley, Alabama, and only about 10 of it was usable. The rest was just wild woods. And my grandmother would swear that there were times that you had to come off the highway and drive down this like 2-mile dirt road to get to their house. And there were times she would see lights hovering in the sky over their property. Now, they're not far from Pensacola, which is a
major base.
Yeah, there's a major area, but it's also a lot of military base and things that are in that area, right?
Right.
So, but she would swear that these lights would hover over the property and light up the whole property, but they would make no sound. And in the 70s, I didn't know about any vehicles that could just hover over your property without making a sound, right? Yeah. Helicopters, even up there, you can hear the right of the blades.
You bet.
So my grandmother would tell us about these things, and us younger kids, we would all kind of laugh thinking she was just maybe nipping at the brandy too much while she was making dinner. But very clearly one day, my cousin and I were sitting down by the pond where we used to fish as kids, and we heard something big stomping in the woods. And, it's animals, whatever. It's, sounds like something big. And all of a sudden at the backside of the pond, which is about 40 yards, 45 yards away, maybe a little more, one of the big tall bushes, it had to be over 6 feet tall, started to kind of shake. And then this hand came up over the top and pushed the top of the bush down. And I could see from about the tip of the nose up what looked to be a Bigfoot character staring at us.
How far away?
Maybe 45, 50 yards. And my cousin and I kind of turned and looked at each other. And I think we were half expecting it's one of our idiot dads out there in a gorilla costume. So we just both kind of stop and look at this thing. But it had a dark inset face. It had kind of this grayish black mane. And it had hair that came up over the top of the hand, kind of like Chewbacca the Wookiee. And we just looked at it. And then the two of us just got this really freaked out feeling. We turned and ran to the house, half hoping we're going to get there and find our dads aren't there and they're out screwing with us. They could tell we were so worked up. They grabbed their rifles. My grandfather grabbed his rifle. They went out marching around looking. They never found anything. But again, they weren't looking for Bigfoot tracks. I guess in their minds, they probably thought maybe a homeless person was roaming around in their property or something else. So they went out to go check. And so my grandparents had a lot of things. And once we explained what it was, they always heard big things walking around out there, and they always saw lights over their property. So it was just kind of, again, my grandmother was terrified of it. She didn't want to get abducted, but she was very, and they were also the ones that introduced me to the Bermuda Triangle, because I remember my uncle wanting to go on a cruise and my grandmother freaking out that don't know, because you're going to have to go through the Bermuda Triangle. You'll never be seen again. And so those things kind of still stick to me in the back of my brain with, the fears that that grandmother instilled in me, where everybody else was making it more of a normal thing.
Wow. You have any siblings, Dave?
I grew up an only child. And 5 years ago, when I found my biological father, I do have 8 siblings. So I've had a chance to meet 4 or 5 of them now. So that, I never had the chance to grow up with that, but I had,
Yeah.
some best friends that were like brothers, and we were together all the time. So
Good.
and we all imbibed each other in the stupidity of, thinking our neighbors were witches, or that there's, monsters down by the creek. And, so we were always in that mindset.
In the world of films, growing up,
Mm-hmm.
did you get into movies by watching them on television like a lot of us did, or did the family, your folks take you out to movie theater to see films, or did at a certain age you start going to see them on your own? And what were some of your favorite films growing up?
Well, yeah, I was lucky. My parents always took me, and my family, my aunt would take me out to see movies.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so we would go to theaters. We'd watch them on TV. There was always that Monday night movie of the week, Friday night movie of the week, before we had 2,000 channels. So, like one of my favorite memories was, it was on Halloween, and I was maybe 12, 13 years old. And it was a weekend Halloween, I think. And, oh, no, it wasn't. It was like Thursday night, because what threw me for a loop was my dad came in and woke me up at like 10 to midnight. He's like, "Get up." And I'm like, "Oh, boys, come on, we're going to go watch a movie." I'm like,
whoa, how cool.
He's like, "Well, this is the only movie that ever scared me." And I'm like, "What?" So we watched George Romero's Night of the Living Dead on channel 32.
Wow.
And I had nightmares, and still do to this day, of zombies thanks to that movie. But my love and fascination for the paranormal just grew exponentially. And then, he took me out to see Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And, so I love action, adventure, and comedy movies, but, Close Encounters, Star Wars, even Harry and the Hendersons, and movies like that. Anything that just dealt with the fantastic I loved it. I loved it.
Do you find that over the years that you have become a public person,
Mm-hmm.
associated with what we used to call fringe or outsider topics, have essentially helped give you the privilege of being someone that people occasionally seek out to share real stories of real experiences with, that they intuitively know you will listen to with an open mind, as opposed to, somebody you'd like to share it with that you're afraid of being judged, or, it'll get everybody that will then learn that you've got this weird story in your background. And at a certain point, did you realize that this came with the territory? This is a responsibility and something to take seriously. And
yeah, that's a great question. And I've kind of run the gamut. When I started this, obviously I take it seriously, but I also realize there is that humor factor to what we do. Talking to empty rooms, going out and staring at the sky, hoping something out of all the nights, this is the night something's going to show itself, right? I mean, so it's kind of absurd when you really think about it. It's, I might as well just walk into the gas station and buy a fistful of lottery tickets. But I used to listen to the stories, and I remember back when we started, people were like, "Oh, you should stream this on video." And I'm like, "Why do you want to look at me and Tim talking about the paranormal?" Because especially there were times, and I know you've had those moments when somebody tells you a story that sounds so ludicrous that you're looking across at somebody else, kind of shaking your head and rolling your eyes. But I learned early on that there is a responsibility to the work that I do, and that it's not my job to judge these stories. It's my job to be a receptive, open place for you to share those stories and discuss what does it mean. And I found that through, all right, like here's a great example. We were telling these stories of the black-eyed kids, the bloody bones man, really weird creatures that would show up in your room. And I got an email one day from this guy talking about this frog-like character that would sit outside his room. And it was like a 5-foot tall frog. And it sounded so absurd. And I remember rolling my eyes and looking at my co-host, and with our mics off, we're laughing about how stupid this story is. And, I read it, shared it, and it was just like, wow, that's weird. That's strange. No doubt about it. We're going to take a break. We'll come back. And we moved on to something else. And all of a sudden I started getting emails from people around the world that said, Dave, thank you for sharing that story. Do you know, I've thought I was insane because I had the exact same thing happen to me. Do you know, Dave, I've almost unalived myself because I thought I was hallucinating and I must be crazy.
Hmm.
And now that I know other people have this experience.
Yes.
So as absurd as it sounds to me, that's only because I have yet to have that experience. So I try not to judge at all. I'll accept it. You might get the kind of smirk and the raised eyebrow from me, but I'm not putting it down. It's just like, wow, that's crazy. But there were a few moments, I had a guest who wrote us this, which came off very funny story, and we kept breaking up as we were reading it. And then she sent me this heartbreaking email afterwards. I sent that to you because I trusted you. And I didn't know you were going to mock me and make fun of me. And I said, oh God, no, that was not the intention. It was just the way the story was written. There are some funny lines, and, without the proper punctuation, it ran into each other where it was, it came off very funny the way we read it. And I apologize. And I even went on the air and apologized. And
good.
I've done my best to not mock them. But there have been guests too, Peter. Right? I had this lovely woman. I got this press release about this woman who met Satan in human form. This Lucifer, he was the real devil, and he was on earth in human form. And it was so beautifully crafted. And she escaped, right? She met him. She was involved with him for a while and broke free from this demonic chain. And wow, this sounds like a great guest. And I get her on the show, and 5 minutes into it, it's complete lunacy. And we're laughing along with her.
Yeah.
Because she realizes how absurd the story sounds. I go, so I have to know, how did you meet Satan? She goes, well, I love to dance. And I was looking in the Penny Saver newspaper, and I found a dance partner, looking for somebody to dance. And I said, well, it's good to know that in these downturn economic times that even Satan has to turn to the Penny Saver instead of putting a want ad in a normal newspaper. And we all both started laughing about it, me and the woman. And she understood how absurd this was. She met him looking for a dance partner. She met him. They danced well together. They had that charisma and that charm together. He proved to her he was the devil. He owned a double wide mobile home in Arkansas, which we had a good laugh over. But he kept his other concubines, the other women who fell for his shenanigans. He had like 3 other trailers behind him. It was like a cult. But she never was sucker enough. She would just dance with him. She never fell for the rest of his stuff. So it was just this charming, wonderful guest who saw the absurdity in her story, could laugh along with us on it, but it was very real.
Did she tell you how the person purporting to be Satan proved to her that he was in fact the Prince of Darkness?
It was in the way that he manipulated people, talked to people, that he told her he was the devil. So it was just kind of this, and she accepted it all on face value. And when you see, like, you'd hear about Reverend Jim Jones, right? You hear about Charles Manson, and you hear these things, and to everybody else, it's just a crazy cult, right? You're just a nut following a crazy cult, which in retrospect is what this woman was kind of indoctrinating herself into, dancing with this guy. But she wasn't the one that would go home with him at the end of the night. And she didn't involve herself in any kind of shenanigans with him. She only danced with him. And when he'd want more, she'd say, no, I will only dance with you, devil. I won't. And I was like, way to put your foot down. So, it was fun. And, but to this woman, that was her real challenge. She was able to beat the devil, and she enjoyed dancing with him, but she was strong enough with God that she could dance with the devil and go home to the Lord every night.
Whew.
Yeah. And it sounds absurd, but I love these people because to me, Peter, the reason you believe is as important to me as the experience that you had. And I think that that's so amazing to hear people. And I want to be that safe space that you can come share your stories with me. We can laugh together. We can be shocked together. We can commiserate together, and share the experience after the fact. But listen to the viewers and listeners that are sharing their feedback to the story, and just make it a safe place to be, a safe haven I had a lot of promises at the beginning of my radio career that if I wanted to become the Howard Stern of the paranormal, I could be a billionaire. All I had to do was just rip these people apart on air, shred them, and I didn't want to do that. I would rather be Dave Schrader and have everybody trust me to talk about it than be a shock jock who embarrasses and humiliates everybody that shares their story.
Yeah. Again, there is this world of the paranormal, for lack of a better term. Do you feel, and it's a big tent, but that generally speaking, non-standard, paranormal, highly unusual experiences that people have are governed by some area of mysticism and spirits and ghosts and ethereal creatures, or that it's really all science and mechanics, but well in advance of what we understand. Again, water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Are there mechanisms in the paranormal that function like that? Or is it just some random miasma that every once in a while something breaks through? Of course, this is a subjective question, but what's your gut feeling about it, or your experience or your intuition about what makes the strings pull and the buttons push and the apparitions apparition?
I think there's a lot to unpack in that, right? I mean, in the case of Bigfoot, he's a cryptozoological being until we find one, and then he becomes a zoological being. People forget, with as crazy as the Bigfoot stories are, that indigenous tribes for hundreds of years have talked about these beings as just another tribe, sometimes as a cannibalistic tribe that they avoid at all costs. Others talk about them as these benevolent, kind of almost forest elemental sprites, if you will.
Yeah.
There are all of these creatures. Less than 200 years ago, Peter, there was the talk of this giant bipedal great ape, and people rolled their eyes and laughed about it. And that's shenanigans. That doesn't exist. We would have found bodies. We would have found bones. We would have found proof until we found proof. And that's the great ape, the gorilla. The silverback gorilla was just 200 years ago. Think about that. Our country is older than the finding of gorillas and proof that gorillas exist. Well, if those are animals that are separated by 0.5% from us, and we're able to colonize and build and revolutionize and industrialize, then if there's something that might be even a quarter of a step ahead of us, maybe they can live in the woods and be giant bipedal hairy hominids, but they work like sentinels, and they know when we're approaching their area. And through wood knocks or howls or cheeks or whatever noise they make, they're always backing up as we're infringing. And when we leave, they move back into their territories. But they leave enough evidence that there's something going on, and enough people from enough walks of life, meaning not just, Luke, Bo, and Uncle Jesse out by the still seeing Bigfoot, right? We're seeing police officers and nurses and politicians and moms and dads and kids. All the world alike share this kind of view of these things. So obviously something is going on.
And for folks that do not follow this subject, there is ever so much physical evidence, some of it really beyond question. I was intrigued to see when we saw each other last in the sales room at the conference. I think there were 2 or 3 folks there dealing in Bigfoot related information and books, right. But seeing those plaster casts of footprints, which are some of them almost incomprehensibly large for a bipedal creature,
right?
And knowing, I'm a cynic, I'm sophisticated, anybody could have created those. You just make the shape so you've got like a giant, the equivalent of a rubber stamp, but with footprint, that kind of thing, and then
Right.
I think cynics, people who are not even debunkers, but skeptics, have to assume or think that surely a percentage of these things are manufactured. It's, bring the suckers in. We know there's enough evidence to intrigue rational people, but it's basically a license to print money. And look at this amazing print right here. At the same time, I know of cases where involving Bigfoot type beings where hair has been, caught on a bush or something and analyzed, and it simply doesn't check out or meet up as any, given species that we know about.
Right.
As you've kind of collected these stories and heard them, can you give us an idea of some of the other physical evidences besides footprints, which of course one can always, look your nose down at because are they real or are they Memorex? But again, physiological evidence. Is there a particular Bigfoot case that captured those realities more than another that sticks in your mind? I'm just curious to know, again, what you could bring into a court of law, so to say, based on your experiences.
Well, again, I think the Patterson-Gimlin Bigfoot footage is the gold standard, and people will roll their eye. Oh, sure, a blurry, janky piece of video. But hear me out on this. If you look at that blurry, janky piece of video from 1967, filmed by a couple of cowboys that were out on a Bigfoot hunt, and you look at the year 1967 in movies, like you brought up earlier, and we look at what Hollywood's very best had to offer us. And in 1967, there was a movie called 2001: A Space Odyssey. And at the opening, you see these monkeys with their bones, and they're beating, and they're standing, they're throwing dirt in front of the obelisk. And those are the dumbest monkey costumes I've ever seen, right? 1967, we also see Pierre Boulez's book, The Planet of the Apes, adapted and brought out. And Hollywood's very best came out to do the makeup, which was astounding for its time, but could not be confused for being a real ape or a Bigfoot. And then the other famous monkeys of that time were Davy, Mickey, Michael, and Peter, and they don't look anything like Bigfoot, right? So I think what's interesting is that as we look at that piece of evidence from 1967, that under the 21st century scrutiny and abilities to take the frames and make them stabilized, to enhance the video to get a better, more detailed look at this being, this evidence should have fallen apart. This evidence should have, you should be seeing the zipper on the costume. And it's funny, on the blurry picture, people see the bottom of the fake leather shoes, and they see the zipper. I don't see that, but if you want to see that, that's what you're going to see. But the more that they've, and people that want to debunk this have cleared up the video, and it's even more realistic. You can see the muscle movements underneath the skin. You can see there's a herniated bulbous point in the back of Patty the Bigfoot's calf. It's all natural. Those are things that would happen in real life, physiology. And then to hear the two guys that were trying to tear this down, Bob Hieronymus and I can't remember the other gentleman's name. They created Philip Morris, the costume maker. They created in 1967 the Bigfoot costume that was worn, and Bob Hieronymus, this tall man, is the one that wore it for that footage, according to them. However, you'd have to look this up, but I think it was early or mid 1990s or maybe early 2000s. They actually tasked Bob Hieronymus and Philip Morris with current technology to recreate the costume to even come near what they were able to do. And it looks like something my kid made out of paper mache. It was garbage. Nothing about it. And there's no listing of where is this gorilla costume that Philip Morris ordered it and altered it. It was a gorilla costume with football pads underneath. And that's what made it look bulkier and bigger, but they couldn't recreate it 30, 40 years later. So to me, when the two biggest detractors can't even prove their own claim that they are the ones in the costume, right? And with as big as that story hit, you mean to tell me you didn't keep the costume? You didn't keep something of Bob standing there holding the head with the black makeup under his eyes? You know, I just don't believe that. I don't believe that that would be the case. So to me, the Patterson Gimlin film, and there's been other great pieces, and the Sierra sounds, and so many other interesting pieces of phenomena that have been captured. And I'm all for skeptics. We need more skeptics.
Absolutely.
Skeptic isn't a bad word.
We have to be. Yes.
I'm a skeptical believer. I've had my own experiences, but I don't believe every experience I hear. And I'm okay to challenge it. And I think that does bother some people that will come to me with their evidence, Peter. And they think that because I'm an experiencer, I will immediately jump on board. And I always tell them, Peter, before you show me this piece of evidence, do you want the truth? Or do you want me to just nod and smile at you politely? And they'll, no, dude, I'm showing it to you for the truth. Okay, here's what I've got. Here's this UFO in the sky. You'll see it fly by, blah, 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 blah. And I look at the footage and I say, okay, you notice how as you move the camera to the left, the light launches off to the right. Yeah, exactly. I said, however, you're also catching the sun. And what you're doing is called refraction. The sunlight is coming through the camera lens, bouncing off the mirror, reflecting off. No, that's not how it works. I go, it is. As a matter of fact, if you watch old 1970s and 80s TV shows, when a police car or somebody is driving at you and you can see the headlights, and then as it starts to turn, you'll notice the headlights jump up and move to the opposite side of the screen. So that's a perfect example of it. And people don't want to hear that. They want to hear that it was a UFO or a Bigfoot or a ghost. And I'm all for giving them the best answers. I'm just going to say that is my perception of this. And you could prove me wrong, but take this to a camera operator, take it to a photographer, ask them what they think it is. And if they can show you, look, I can reproduce that by getting in the same with the sun, see how it tracks and creates this ball of light, or, you know, as long as people are willing to hear the truth.
I guess the mantra governing this came at us for the first time as such in the early 90s. Was it 91 that the first episode, the pilot episode of the X-Files was shown?
Right.
And the iconic poster, I want to believe. And surely that phrase governs so many and so many aspects of human longing.
And everything we've laughed about, everything that
in
show
some cases,
is
it's I want to believe that this is absolute nonsense and does not happen.
right.
In other cases, yes, please, this is what I want. So,
And many of those stories that they
where,
covered are now proving to be real. We're realizing that there have been these UFO cover-ups. There have been other cover-ups that deal with strange phenomena because our government, our churches, our religions don't know how to answer it in a way that won't undermine them.
Exactly. And we're going to be getting into that certainly in the second hour. The difference between a skeptic and a debunker, for me, is best defined by the mantra, it can't be, therefore it isn't, therefore it's something else. And my job is to pat you on the head and give you a pseudo scientific explanation and send you on your way, because there's nothing to see here, folks. If only.
Right.
I also think sometimes people say, well, you know, the chances are pretty good by the time you die, we're not going to know much more than we know right now. And won't you feel that you've, spent your life in a frustrating way? And I think of people that I started out with, much older, who are no longer here. And they did not necessarily have the answers to the questions that they were sinking in the reality of UFOs. But what it comes down to for me is, can you imagine how boring life would be without mysteries?
Right.
Oh my gosh. And whether or not they're chosen mysteries like in your own theology or, the mysteries of the world around us, we got a lot of them. Peter Robbins here. The show is meanwhile here on Earth. My special guest is Dave Schrader, and we are going to be back in 5. Stay with us.
The new book, How to Research a Haunted House by paranormal investigator Margie Kay and professional researcher Violet Wisdom is now available from Unex Media. This one-of-a-kind book explains how to do research on a house with uncommon methods and resources used by historic home researchers, and how to determine who may be doing the haunting and why. How to Research a Haunted House can be used by homeowners, renters, investors, and it should be in the library of all professional paranormal investigators. Get this unique book at unxmedia.com or amazon.com. That's unxmedia.com or amazon.com.
Tickets are now on sale for Rebels of Disclosure 2025, May 12th through the 15th in Grafton, Illinois at the beautiful Pierre Marquette Lodge and Conference Center. This will be a 4-day event with 12 speakers covering topics such as ET contact, experiencer testimonies, lost history, secret space programs, time travel, Illuminati, parallel realities, and so much more. Visit journeytotruth.online for more details.
And we are back. Peter Robbins here. The show is Meanwhile, here on Earth. And my special guest tonight is broadcaster and radio legend Dave Schrader. Welcome back, Dave.
Well, thank you, Peter. Legend, you say? Legend. Wow.
Yes. Unlike me, who is a legend in my own mind. I've been thinking in part about your grandmother's influence on you, and this event that you described, perceiving her and the polka dot dress and putting that together. For the moment, make believe that you're hosting this show, and I have just called in as somebody with a story I'd like to know your take on around this same subject. Dave, years ago, a friend of mine, their mother died very suddenly. Both extraordinary, interesting women, and a complex relationship like many mothers and daughters have. A few days after the funeral, my friend receives a call, maybe it's a day after, close on, from her best friend who happens to live in Missouri. but is an actress and lives part of the year in New York. And my friend gets the call, and her friend is absolutely beside herself, and talking so fast that my friend has to slow her down and ask her to repeat herself. She had just walked into her own home, probably turn of the century, 1920s, nice, sensible, good size 2-story house. And when you walk into the main foyer area, it opens up, and you see there is a balcony kind of area, behind which are the bedroom doors and things. And she walks in, closes the door, and looks up, and there is the mother of this woman who has just passed. Very well known to my friend's friend for many years, very close. And she looks up and she sees her, somewhat translucent, but there, and almost glowing, and obviously in a very positive frame of reference. And before she can scream, this being makes it clear to her that there's nothing to be afraid of, and that she is fine. She wants the friend to tell her daughter that everything is just wonderful on the other side, that she loves her, and a few other things that she wanted her to pass along. Well, as absolutely over the top, excited, confused, anxious as the friend is, my friend is very pragmatic, and immediately gets very objective and starts to ask her friend a series of questions. First, what was she wearing? Second, was there anything different about her hair? Third, was there any particular jewelry that she noted? Again, remembering we're looking up, to the foyer area in that balcony. And the friend thinks a minute and says, yes, what she was wearing was just what I'm going to describe right now. Her hair was done in such and such a way, never like I had seen in life. And I could see, because it was large, that there was a brooch, on the particular dress. My friend realized as her friend was talking, although she would have had no chance or no way to properly know this, they hadn't spoken since the funeral a day or so before, that it was a dress that she had picked out that was not something that her friend had ever seen her in, that, as is the case sometimes in mortuaries, they do the hair, but it's not reflective of how that person wore it in life, which was the case here.
Right.
But most memorable, the description of the brooch, which was an old family heirloom, and that there had been a matching one that could be compared to it. It was her mom. And, one can always argue. And sometimes for me, it's just been, the last resort of those who really can't deal with what they seem to be seeing. Even if there's 1 in a million chance or whatever, okay, that answers it good enough for me, even though the odds are insane that it could have happened that way. And again, this is quite parallel in some ways to your similar memory with your grandmother. Do you feel, Dave, or think or believe that we're dealing with, again, a series of kind of synapses, one dimension away, but governed by laws of physics as real, again, as water boiling at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, or that it's much more mystical and clouded and romantic and spooky, or something in the middle?
I think it's definitely in the middle, Peter, because listen, we have done remarkable things. We don't give ourselves as humanity enough credit for just how amazing we are. And we made leaps and bounds and changes from things. And whether it's that we did find a downed aircraft, a UFO, and we've been able to back engineer everything, that's still leaps and bounds. That's having the knowledge and wherewithal to be able to deconstruct something to make something better for us. So I think we don't give ourselves enough credit. It's real easy to say that aliens built the pyramids. Why isn't it as easy to say that they had a long time? Humanity had a long time to build those pyramids, and they knew things that we don't know now. And they might have known about harmonics, and they may have known ways to manipulate electromagnetic frequencies that we've lost in time. And or we use it now but never think to put it in there, right? You have the Coral Castle in Florida. One man built that by himself. So tell me that we couldn't have built the pyramids. This guy has 2-ton, 3-ton rocks that he lifted and positioned and put in place by himself.
That's right.
So physics and the sciences that we all believe in are limited, because remember, even if we go back, I think, let's say 150 years ago, Peter, right? What we're talking about is black magic. You can get rid of this headache with eating this root. How would you know that? It must be the work of the devil. Or it's just understanding how things work, right? And that I don't know how it works, but I can tell you that it does. And as we take it and continue to progressively study it in science, we learn that it's aspirin. We learn that it's a natural form of painkiller, or aloe there we could rub on the sunburn and it didn't hurt as much. We learn through progression, right? I mean, these are the things that we do. Sometimes we forget. And for people to say we don't forget, 25 years ago, we used to talk to one another at the dining room table. 25 years ago, we cared about our neighbors. 25 years ago, we helped people without thinking twice. Now we're so absorbed in our phone and getting likes and making sure that enough people are watching our videos or checking out our food that we just had for dinner, that I'm sitting at a table with Peter Robbins talking about UFOs, Rendlesham Forest, ghosts, demons, Bigfoot, any possibility. I want to listen to our conversation and have that conversation so that I've got that, not looking at my phone, not losing those bits. We've already forgotten simple things like courtesy. So you mean to tell me we couldn't have maybe forgotten how to do the things that we did in the past? Because kids are always pushing against the adults. I know better. I know better. And they may create a new way to do it, but it doesn't mean that it was an easier way. It just fits their paradigm. So I think we could do a lot of things we weren't able to do before. I think telepathy is something that is more inherent in people than we give credit for. I had a telepathic experience with my mom and went home feeling anxiety and stress on a New Year's Eve because I kept having visions and flashes of my mom collapsing, being wheeled out of the house, being put in an ambulance, being taken to the hospital. Every time I drove past that street, dropping friends off on New Year's Eve, I had another flash of something. And I finally went home. Mom came shuffling out in the kitchen, hair all wild, winking with one eye because the light's too bright. What's going on? I said, I stayed sober to be sober cab for everybody, Mom. She goes, all right, let me go to the bathroom and we'll come back out and talk. And I said, okay. And my mom turned around and fell into a grand mal seizure, which she had never had before and never had again.
Oh my God.
How do you explain that? Well, Dave, what are the laws? It's just coincidence. It would be coincidence if I came home and that happened and I was there to help my mom. But I was precognitively seeing something happening to my mom. I can't explain it. It's beyond the understanding of our current situation. But it's not, because the governments have sunk millions of dollars in trying to understand psychic phenomena. And they didn't shut it down because it was a failure. They shut it down because there's no way they can control it. Or they shut it down, as you and I know with the UFO Project Blue Book was shut down. They shut down the official research, but they just opened it up under a different name. Sure. Exactly. And with new people researching it. Because now, right, Bud Hopkins isn't playing ball. He's not saying these are all fakes and mistakes. It's, holy God, there's something to this, right? And you've got J. Allen Hynek not following suit and saying, oh, well, yeah, it's natural phenomena. It's ball lightning. It's gas. It's, planes that are misidentified. He's saying, oh, I think there's something more to this. And suddenly their projects are shut down, right? And then there's new projects with new people they put in, hoping are going to follow their lead and edict. And that's not the way it works. So science-wise, I think there's a lot going on that science knows about, but doesn't know how to explain to us or how to make it comfortable for us. Yeah. And for people saying, well, we're not idiots, we're not children, really? Because sometimes we get bad news and our immediate reaction is to let's burn things. Let's break things. Let's hurt one another. Because if this doesn't make sense in my world, the only way to make sense of it is by destroying a grocery store or tipping over a cop car. Even people that are happy, their team won the big game, and they celebrate by destruction. So you want our government to come out and tell you, yes, there are alien craft from other places, other dimensions that are in our area, and they can shut down our nuclear reactors. They can shut down our nuclear weapons. They can come and go as they please. We do not have the technology to stop them. We do not yet have the ability to do this. No, you think you want that. And I'll be Jack Nicholson from A Few Good Men, right? You need me on that wall. You need me. You can't handle the truth. And we can't, because for so long, everything hinged on church. Everything hinged on religion. And if we upset the apple cart, then where are we? What are we? We're meaningless. We're useless. No, look bigger than that. The church has stepped up and said, it's okay to believe in life on other planets. Our God is too good. Our artisan that created us, no artist paints one spectacular masterpiece, puts the brush down and says, I don't need to do another. Why would God? Why would the creator? Why would the universe? Why would Gaia? Why would whatever you're comfortable calling it stop with one? Right? There's so much more to it. But whether you like it or not, and this is not a politic conversation of them versus us, Democrats versus Republicans. It's just the way it is. Yeah. We put people in office. We vote because we want people to make the hard choices. We don't have to. So we can shake our fist in righteous indignation when they do something to piss us off, and we can nod when they do something that we like. We ask these people to be our controllers. We hand over control to them. And they have to look and weigh the pros and cons of releasing information. And if they release information like a UFO crashed in the desert in Roswell, and we don't know what to do about it, and they're everywhere, people are going to be so paranoid and terrified. It's easier to put the story out there than retract it and let you know that something weird happened, but it's probably just a down balloon. It's just a mistake. It's mistaken identity. It was a craft that we're working on, right? So there are believers who are going to believe it no matter what. There are people that are on the fence that are kind of like, it still sounds like maybe something did happen, but I think it was the Russians or the Chinese or, you know, the Atlanteans, and we shut it down quick. So there are all these different elements to look at these stories, but we need mommy and daddy to protect us from ourselves sometimes. And when our reaction to everything is, let's burn it, let's freak out and shoot at it because we don't understand it.
You remind me, Dave, when you take it down to the baseline, all fear is fear of the unknown. The UFO phenomena and its implications being just a wonderful textbook example. But it doesn't have to be, you know, a fear of the mysterious in an exotic way as much as, are my kids going to get into trouble? Am I going to stay married? Am I going to have Social Security by the time I need it? Are we going to have another weather emergency in my part of the country? It's fear of the unknown.
Right.
And sometimes, and it's just a human thing, it's much easier to shoot the messenger or to make up a story that covers what you're afraid of and pack it away and hope that it doesn't rear its ugly head on you. I wanted to ask you, as somebody who has heard and chronicled I'm sure, ever so many accounts of precognition, which
Mhm.
is a particular area of paranormal studies and one I find fascinating. If you have ever had a full out precognitive experience yourself, and if so, if you could share that with us.
Yeah, like I mentioned with my mom was probably the first biggest one. Um, well, I could even step that back. When my aunt, lovely lady, she wanted to have a baby so bad. I was her
Mm.
de facto son.
Ah,
And she took care of me since she was 17. She was always there to babysit, and I love my Aunt Judy, and I still love her to death. And she kept trying to have a baby and couldn't, and things were failing, and it wouldn't work, and nothing was happening. And one day she called me and told me her dog, Mighty, this ugly, stupid little beagle thing, that was just a horrific dog, but loved my aunt to death, passed away.
ah.
And I said, oh, well, now you're going to have a baby. And she said, well, you can't say that. And I said, oh, yeah, you're going to have a baby, and it's going to be a little boy. And she almost was offended
How old were you?
that I would be so cavalier. I was a teenager. I think I'm 14 or 15 years older than my cousin.
What were you
So
feeling when you said that?
it just was like this. It wasn't even a feeling. It was just this. It was a knowing. As soon as she told me, I just told her, and she just couldn't wrap her brain around that. And like I said, was
Sure.
almost offended until 9 months later, my cousin Kyle was born.
Oh my.
How do you, wow, that was precognition, but it wasn't even a flash of precognition. It was just a knowing to me. And I
Yeah.
have no way of understanding it other than that. My mom on New Year's Eve, 1988, I was a month away from my first son being born, and I was out at all the parties, but I stayed sober and drove everybody home. And as I passed by the street, I kept having these flashes, these visions I couldn't understand, but enough that at the end of the night, when I ended up at my friend's house, I was supposed to stay the night there. I said, no, I got to go home, man. Something's wrong. And I went home, and my mom fell into that full-on grand mal seizure.
Yeah.
So there have been those moments where we feel that connection, and we have it a lot. As a matter of fact, right, we've all had that where today I'm sitting there thinking, boy, it's been months since I heard from my buddy Peter Robbins, and all of a sudden my phone starts to vibrate, and I look down, and it's Peter calling me.
Yeah.
Now, was I precognitively picking up on that he was thinking of me and going to call, or did I put out a call to the universe and Peter went, I wonder how my friend Dave Schrader is, and decides to pick up the phone at that moment and call me? Or could it just be that it's both? Could it be that we were synchronized in the right moment? I tell people that precognition happens all the time, but we don't know what to call it. It's also called empathy. You ever wake up one day, Peter, and you're in a bad mood for no reason? You've had a good day. You had a good night, full night of sleep. You had dinner, your favorite meal last night. Why are you waking up in this pissy mood? And why are you so bothered? And you're just like kind of, oh, God, it's a bad day. I don't know why. And then all of a sudden you get a phone call, and it's your brother. And he's like, yeah, hey, Pete, what's going on? Man, driving into work today, I hit a stupid deer, ruined my car. And of course, I'm a week past paying my car insurance, so they're not going to take care of this. And then I get in, and then I'm lectured by my boss for 2 hours because I'm late, and I'm trying to tell him I almost died hitting a deer. And all of a sudden you start to realize, oh, this anger I have is not mine. That's a form of precognition, right? You're feeling the butterfly effect from somebody you love, from somebody you know, somebody you're connected to. So I think that it happens a lot. We have this precognition that happens, a knowing. I'm a father. I was at Mall of America when it first opened here in Minnesota, and I had my son Cliff with me, and he was about 5 or 6 at the time. And it was a wonder. It's the world's largest mall. And I walk in with my buddy and my son, and we're standing there in wide wonder, just looking around. And right in front of us is Camp Snoopy, this huge theme park in the middle of a mall. And I'm looking around, and we must have stood there for 5 minutes just looking. And then I go, can you believe this, Cliff? And I look down, and my son's gone. Gone. And I look around, and it's a sea of people as far as you could see. And I just stopped, and I go, wait.
Whoa.
And I put my hands up, and my friend's like, what's going on? I go, and I just started walking in a path, and I walked, and I cut through people, and I walked right to my son, and I couldn't see him. He was a little guy. And I walked right to, it was like something brought me right to my boy.
Yes.
And I've had those moments. People have had those moments that you may never ever have it again. But oh, grandma's gone. Don't be stupid. Grandma's fine. I just talked to her an hour ago. And then you get the phone call 2 hours later. Grandpa says grandma passed in her sleep. And it never happened before and never happened since.
Yeah.
But it happened. And maybe it's because in that moment, you were not in any headspace. And that message was enough to come through. But we're so distracted by things like you mentioned before, bills to pay, and is the economy going to tank, and what's gas prices going to look like, and are my kids safe, and that we miss, because of all the chatter, all the radio stations playing at once, we can't tune in that one thing we want to hear. And that's where it starts to become, you have to take that back. So I love skeptics and cynics and people that'll put down what we are fascinated by. I'm fine with that. And when people tell me, doesn't it bother you nobody believes you? I said, absolutely not. Because my heart actually hurts more for you that doesn't believe there's still magic in this universe. I feel worse for you than I do for me. I'd much rather go on believing in elves and fairies and UFOs and Bigfoot and ghosts and demons and angels than to think life is about getting up in the morning, shaving, taking a shower, having a piece of toast and a cup of warm coffee, going to work, sitting there for 8 hours, hating what I do, getting home, not getting along with the family, going to bed and starting it all over again. What a horrible existence.
Yeah.
I would much rather be open to the possibilities. And even if they may seem so far-fetched, isn't it more exciting to think there may be something to it? And let's investigate it to the end. And we may never get that final answer, but my life has been so much more rich.
Yeah.
And I've been able to meet people and have conversations with people I would have never thought to speak with before because of our common interests.
Yeah. A related but completely separate area of the paranormal world is synchronicity. The world of coincidences, which more often than not, when we have one happen to whatever degree of coincidence it is often entertaining and just, gee, last night I was listening to the radio while I was making dinner, and I was thinking, a sentence ran through my mind with a very specific word, and bang, that no more than a finger snap later, it came up, the word came up in the sentence that somebody was saying on the radio. I'd call that an entry level coincidence, and one that I can accept without expending much energy on paranormal theory. But at a certain point, the world of coincidence tips into something that we often make more significant because the odds are just so extreme. And often ascribe great meaning or feeling to. In my 20s, I was looking to start to become a writer, and I think it was my second article that I was able to sell to, in this case, a pulp magazine called ESP, was inspired by having read a certain amount of Carl Jung's writings and learning of his fascination with synchronicity. During World War I, he explored it to a good degree, even kept a journal of coincidences. And I thought, well, there's a perfect framework for my first, for an article on something. And so I started to keep a journal of coincidences. And it could be as simple as a New Yorker coming down the subway stairs and stepping up to the mark just as the train pulls in, just as it pulls in. Always a nice satisfaction to that. And it ended with a coincidence that was so extreme and so absolutely outrageous that my editor, who by coincidence was visiting me at my loft in Lower Manhattan at the time, and kind of had it, and saw it firsthand, he refused to end the article with it because he thought it would just sound too fake. And I'm just going to give it to you quick here. This was a guy from Rhode Island. The old days before internet, we would write to each other by the U.S. mail. And he was coming down to New York City for a rare trip, had business there, and I invited him over for dinner. He had one errand to run, which was a friend of his girlfriend's who he knew lived somewhere in the lower Manhattan area. We have dinner. I ask him for her phone number, give her a call, and put my friend on. And they chat a bit, and he ends the call. And no, I take that back. They chat a bit, and he hands the phone back to me. He's going to be leaving my place and then walking over to where she lives. She gives me the address, and I say, well, what a coincidence. Your street intersects with my street. At the time, landline only, and mine was in the back of the loft, right next to my window opening on my air shaft, looking at buildings, across the way. And well, isn't that a coincidence? You live right next to the building that's my post office. And as I'm talking and absentmindedly looking out of my rear window, third story, I'm looking directly across the alley at, third floor of the building directly across from me. The shade is pulled down, but it's backlit. And it's obviously someone on the phone. And we're chatting. And at a certain point, I think, no. And I ask her, are you on the third floor of the building that you live in? And yes. Why would you? I said, and are you speaking on the phone at the back of your building? Yes. What's going on? I say, pull up your shade. Well, we stared at each other for a moment, both of us completely aware of the insanity of the odds here. We ended up having rather a fiery affair for the next few months, which I was very appreciative of. And then she moved out of the area and I didn't see her again. But Howard, my editor, was there. And he just put the kibosh on it. He said, I saw it. It happened. It's too crazy. No one will believe it. And you've got some great coincidence. And I reflect back on that sometimes. And, like of all the gin joints in all the cities, how many opportunities, forget about New York City, let's talk about lower Manhattan and the hundreds of thousands of similar mathematical possibilities of looking out your window and looking into the window and at the person that by random fate, you happen to have made a phone call. I guess I've answered my own question that I ascribe significance to that particular event, even though I'm fine if it was just a random 1 in 40 million, just a coincidence.
Right.
They happened.
Sure.
And at the same time, how about that, huh?
Here's the beauty of it, right? And I'll get deep with you on this in a second, but we all want signs. We want signs from the universe, from God, from aliens, from ghosts, from whatever. But we then ascribe what we want the sign to be, which then means we miss so many of the other signs. And I love this. I always use this thought. There was a great movie in the 80s called, and by great movie, I'm using that very loosely. It was called The Man with Two Brains, and it was a Steve Martin movie. And in this movie, he is a world-renowned brain surgeon who has perfected the screw-top method of brain surgery.
Yeah, good old Steve Martin.
Yeah. So in this movie, his wife, the one love of his life, passes away. And he meets Kathleen Turner's character later on. And he thinks he's fallen in love with her. And she's this money-grubbing, horrible human. And he goes into his home and he's standing there in front of the fireplace. And there's this beautiful picture, this portrait of his wife. And he stares at it and he goes, oh, darling, I love you. I'll never love anything as much as I love you. But I feel like I'm at a point, maybe I should move on. But I don't want to do it without your blessing. Could you give me a sign? any sign. And the picture begins to spin, and you hear, no, no, and the wind starts blowing, and his hair's blowing, and
he's missing it,
flying off the shelves and crashing all around him, and then it all stops, and you see the picture just kind of bouncing on the wall. And he looks up at it, and he takes the picture off the wall, and he goes, well, until you're ready to give me a sign, I'm just going to put you in the closet. And he walks over and he puts that portrait in the closet, because what he wanted was a sign to confirm what he wanted to hear. Right? And we've all had that little nagging bit in the back of our head that says, she's beautiful, but she looks like trouble. No, 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 no. It's not like that. Just go, oh, and then you end up burned, son, right? Or she ends up burned. We all have it, and we push past it. And it's a coincidence that we're feeling that way. Or it's a coincidence that that girl has the exact same name of the last two women that burned me beyond recognition in a relationship. I can't just not date Sandras because two other Sandras, ruined my life. But maybe you got to start looking at the bigger picture. And when I was a teenager, I love music. I was mostly into the 60s and 70s and 50s music, right? My parents' generation, because that's what they listened to. And I had a very rough time. I had just broken up with the love of my life. I had lost a bunch of friends in the mix because, relationships are messy. When you break up, somebody gets custody of the friends, right? And I got to the point where I decided maybe it was time to just not be here anymore. So I'll be cognizant of how I say this so it doesn't screw up your analytics. But so I went up to my dad's room, and nobody was home. And I opened up his cabinet, and I took out one of his handguns, and I looked, and there was fully loaded. And okay. And I put it in my mouth and pulled the trigger, and crack, nothing happened. What the hell? And I looked, and I made sure the safety's off, and I pulled it out again, and everything's where it needs to be. And I put the gun back in my mouth, and crack, nothing happens.
Whoa.
So I'm like, what the hell? And I'm literally getting ready for the third round when my dad's headlights pan into the bedroom. And I thought, I can't do this to him. I can't let him hear the crack of the gun and know he was a minute too late.
Oh.
So I guess I didn't think, well, it's going to be a pretty bad day for him when he gets home and finds me all over the walls in his bedroom. But I put the gun back. I went down into the basement, and I retreated into what I usually did, which was music. And I had all the lights off except for the glow of my stereo. So radio calls me again, Peter. I put my headphones on. I start scrolling, and I catch this pop tune that I kind of liked, and I'm listening to it, but I'm not. My brain is going 100 miles an hour, and the song ends, and a dumb song comes on. I spin the dial, and I catch that same song again, and I keep listening to it in the background as my brain is processing, poor me. Nobody's ever felt like this before, Peter. You have to understand, I was a teenage boy. Nobody's ever been as brokenhearted as a teenage boy. Nobody's ever lost the love of their life as a teenage boy. Nobody could ever
it's never happened before. It will never happen again.
My pain is deeper than anybody's that's ever lived.
Yeah.
And the song ends, and another dumb song comes on. I spin the dial, and I catch the song again, and I just let it play again in the background. This happens no more than 5 or 6 times. And suddenly around the 5th or 6th time, it feels like somebody took their hands off my ears, and now my head is hearing the music. And the song is called Dancing in the Dark by Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah.
And to many people, and I'm willing to bet many of your viewers and listeners think of it as a fun little pop tune. And all of a sudden,
a powerhouse, fabulous lyrics and great song.
And the words suddenly start pecking through the fog of my brain, and I hear, I take a look in the mirror. I can't stand my clothes, my hair, my face. I look around my life, and this place is killing me, and everything in it's killing me. And I'm, this is not the life I want. This is not the life I need. This is not where I want to be. Yes, I totally feel that. I hear you, Bruce. And then he goes, but you can't start a fire sitting around crying with a broken heart. You can't start a fire worrying about your little world falling apart. And this song, this dumb little pop song, I start to realize, oh my God, this is Bruce Springsteen, one of the most famous singers on planet Earth. He knows what it feels like to hurt like this. He knows what it's like to feel like I don't like looking at myself. I don't like the sound of my voice. I don't like anything about my life right now.
Yeah.
But that doesn't have to be what defines me. And that song saved my life and put me back into the path of living. And I've had dark days since, and I usually turn into Bruce Springsteen to get me through. And I find that in the wisdom of the bard, Bruce Springsteen, the boss, that I'm not alone. Somebody else has felt these feelings before. Somebody else has had this moment. And I've shared this story when you talked earlier about, do I feel a sense of responsibility? I get to do something, and I get to reach millions of people around the globe with my voice and with my stories. And part of me thought, I'm not going to tell that story about my suicide attempt because I'm going to look like a broken idiot. And then I thought, nah, you know what? Maybe somebody can get something from my story.
Yeah, like your life back.
I've been opening up about this story, and I've tell it, once or twice a year for the last 19 years. And I get beautiful emails from people. And I've had strangers just come up to me at events and give me a big hug. And they say, you got to know, man, that night you told that story, I was sitting on the ledge ready to go. And I heard it and I thought, well, geez, if Dave can survive this, and now he's got 11 kids and 9 grandkids, and he's living a dream that he's wanted since he was a child, and things aren't always easy, but it's not worth taking out, and I can do this. And the nicest thing I've ever heard is, you were my Bruce Springsteen. Wow. So I do take it as a blessing to have the gifts that I have to speak, to share it with people that care and want to hear it, and to be open enough to realize that we're all human, sharing a human experience. And maybe if I let you see that I'm vulnerable and human, I'm not just this guy you hear on the radio, that I have flaws and cracks in the armor. It's okay. We can all be like this, and we can survive it. And let's keep looking for the magic. Let's keep waiting for those moments when Bruce Springsteen's voice calls out to you in the dark. It was not the sign I wanted. It was not the sign I expected, but it was the sign I got. And to cue to another piece of music, and the Rolling Stones, right? You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need. Oh yeah, right? And that's beautiful. Music speaks to my heart. It speaks to my brain. It lifts me. That's why I think when we go out ghost hunting, we'll play music. And sometimes the music will interact and get something happening in that home or in that place, because music is the great translator. It can affect people with Alzheimer's and dementia that are in a constant state of fugue, that they're never speaking, and all of a sudden they'll look up and start singing along with a song, and you haven't heard them utter a word in 20 years. It is transportive, right? I mean, if you ever listen to a song, Peter, and all of a sudden you're back in that fiery relationship again, and you can almost feel their hand in yours and her lips on yours as that song plays, and you can smell the air, you can feel the electricity in the moment. It's amazing. So synchronicities happen. And I think it's beautiful to have these moments and pay attention, not just to the, oh, I always see 333 on my clock. Not that. That's cool, but you're missing something else. Start paying attention. When you see 333, look up to the sky, look down to the ground, look around you, because maybe that's the moment the UFO flies over, or $100 bill blows across the street in front of you. Maybe the reason you saw 33 wasn't just so you could see 333. It was to make you aware that every moment counts, and that in every moment you have to be watching.
You just reminded me of a moment. And certainly more than 40 years ago, I was living down in the eastern corner of Chinatown in Manhattan, in Lower Manhattan. It was coming on Christmas, and I was pretty broke, and, thinking about the things I'd like to get the people that I love. And thank you, Central Casting. It was a windy afternoon, and I was walking with my eyes down, and, flotsam and jetsam blowing by, and a piece of paper was blowing toward me. Instinctively, I just put my foot down and stopped it, and bent down and picked up a somewhat crumpled $100 bill. It was one of the greatest experiences of my material life. It was just so joyously outrageous. And again, the timing was flawless. And you just find yourself laughing at fate, at life, happenstance, at coincidence. And
then hopefully, Peter, the person on the other side of that $100 bill was Dave
yes,
Schrader. And the reason I say that is because I've been places where, you know, I put my money in my pocket and I reach in to grab my phone, or I grab something, you know, you drop money all the time.
but $100 bill?
Yeah, I've lost stupid money, right? You've been on a foreign trip and you've got all that fake plastic currency in your pocket that feels like, you know, Monopoly money. And I was off on a trip. I lost 250 euro. And right. And when you think of that, you're like, holy cow, Dave, 250 euro. Didn't it crush you? And it did for a second.
Yeah. And then
I thought, somebody that needs it's going to find that 250. And that made me feel better. And there's nothing I can do about it. I've looked.
Yeah.
I can't find it. It's not here. So I can sit here and let the world crumble around me, or I can say, I hope the person that needs it finds it.
Yeah. For me, it was just the opposite. If I hope the person who lost it didn't need it, you know,
Right.
and maybe that they were not a nice person and they got this money by illicit means, and I'm going to liberate it for people that I love. How entertaining these moments are for all of us to kind of look back on, to lean into. And again, for some people, the frustration of never having the questions that they set out to answer as part of, you know, their mission in life means defeat. I'm reminded of something that Martin Luther King had said relative to achieving your goal. You will or you won't, to paraphrase him, but it's the ride there that you can, you know, we're all on together. In the world of paranormal studies, I think also there's an opportunity, and you're a good example of it, to grow as a person, to be of more value to the people around you, to be a chronicler of other people's experiences, to hopefully make this area of study or interest something less intimidating that you're more open to. I realized years ago, in terms of, you know, being an independent contractor and self-employed or self-unemployed, depending on the moment in my life, that we have an opportunity to create content that if we find it interesting enough, maybe other people will. And I realize that, I don't know if it's what I'm best at, but it's what I find I gravitate toward. There are ever so many people in the world of UFO-related research who hold views and whose presentations are a great deal more colorful and exotic than mine are. I realize I'm maybe best at getting folks into the foyer before they enter the house, and on a 101 kind of basis, doing a presentation, they can come away saying, well, he doesn't seem like he escaped from an institution. He's fairly articulate. The things that he's saying seem grounded in factual, real world material. He's laying it out chronologically so that I can see where these alleged events and the so-called documents that back them up fit into what I know about that moment in post-war history. And okay, I will take a step into the room. At that point, other colleagues take over, and, you know, people find and refine their interests. I'm reminded, because I'm somewhat older than you, that listening to radio for me as an adolescent was just a huge part of growing up, going back to, well, as a kid, listening with my Nana to all of the soap operas, and my introduction to jazz through her. But where in theater of the mind, where your ability to create your own pictures of what's entertaining you and not having to rely or needing or necessarily wanting television or film. radio is becoming more arcane in terms of the true in the darkness of it. What we're doing right now is now incorporated into the world of radio and podcasts and a lot of people's definitions. But I think also one of the things that we dovetail into is that ancient tradition of being storytellers, although our stories are not stories as much as they are real accounts of things that people have experienced, even if they're unexplainable. And I like being part of that tradition as a chronicler and as somebody who shares stories, either that have happened to me or that I pass along from, people that I've interacted with. I also think what we do, we're pretty fortunate in that as long as we're compos mentis, it's not like being a dancer or a sports figure where at a certain point you need to invest in a bar or retail operation because your body wears out. If you do radio, like acting, well, you can be a decrepit, little dried up thing as long as you've still got a brain and you're interesting enough. You can keep doing what you do, into a point where at this point in your career, your evolution in the world as a communicator, is anything changing because of the way the current world is, or do you see your focus shifting in the future, or you pretty much have found your niche and will continue doing what you do and the way you do it and where you do it until further notice?
I have been adaptive since I started this in January 1st of 2006. My idea was never to let myself be pigeonholed or to pigeonhole ideas. It's been something that I've gone through, realized that there's more to these things. We can't just put them in a special little box and this is what a ghost is, this is what an alien is, this is what a cryptid is. I am fluid because I think that there's so much more going on, and I love to learn new ideas and ways to look at things. And you talk about synchronicity. You talk about watching for signs. Look, I'm going to take advantage of my sign and the synchronicity you just laid out for me. You said, Dave, you're a chronicler of people's stories, and that we like to put out the theater of the mind. Well, I've chronicled people's stories in a book called Theater of the Mind, Tales from the Darkness. And it is stories, a few of my very own and some that have been shared with me through the years by listeners and experiencers around the world that said I could share these so that the world would be a little less big and that people could see that there are many different types of things. And in this book, I could have made it just about ghosts or aliens or cryptids, but I wanted to put in all of the different things, from time slip phenomena to ghosts to cryptids to alien to light phenomena, so that there's a wide spectrum. And even though each story in each case is its own thing, you realize how connected they really are. So it's on Amazon. You can find Theater of the Mind, Tales from the Darkness. And if you get it, please rate and review it once you've read it. You can also go to my website at paranormal60.com. Just scroll down the front page and you can order an autographed copy off of my website. So that's there. So I hope you don't mind me pimping myself out a little bit, Peter.
Oh, no, we were going to cover that before we went off the air. No, certainly. Yes, I'm delighted. Have you been getting good responses to the book?
Yeah, people, it was funny. A lot of people were like, I bought it because I like you. And I didn't know what it was going to be like. Man, I really like the book. I've been really blessed that the people writing the reviews have been very kind to me. Even the people that aren't thrilled with the book, maybe aren't thrilled with it for something else. Oh, I thought it was just going to be a book about ghosts. So they might give me 2 stars, but not because it's a bad or poorly written book, just because it wasn't what they expected. So I'll take that. Even in the loss, there's a win, right? So
you remind me, Bud Hopkins' last book was a wonderful memoir called Art, Life, and UFOs that began as a monograph that he'd written years before and worked up ultimately into a full manuscript. And I had cause to speak with a number of people who have read the book over the years. But of course, for most of our viewers and listeners, is best known as a pioneering UFO researcher focusing on the abduction phenomena. but had a separate and very distinguished career that he was better known for many people, which was as a artist, as a painter and sculptor. And how can I say? I've completely lost my train of thought. It just derailed off the tracks. What was I talking?
We were talking about books and sharing the stories and
Oh
seeing
yeah,
the
right.
synchronicities.
His book is called Art, Life, and UFOs, and a number of people were disappointed because there wasn't enough about the UFOs. Some was taken up by art. People interested in his art life were a little disappointed. There was too much on UFOs, and then other people just, why talk about your life when you? It's a stew, and we all have, those components mixed together.
Right.
It's a wonderful book, and I recommend it. At the same time, he was the first person to recognize how difficult some of the material that he dealt with and that we're dealing with was to simply accept. If you have no grounding in it or no experience of your own, you're an outsider to the experience, the same way that experiencers have found themselves as outsiders to a good degree, up until really we're in a more accepting era now, that's for sure.
But even so, look at how many wonderful moments we share where, what do you do for a living, Dave? Well, I'm a radio show host. Oh, what kind of show? Music? Nope. I talk about the paranormal. Oh my God. Do you really believe in that garbage? Aliens and ghosts? Well, I believe that people have experiences that are worth listening to, and I've had my own that I cannot explain through logic. That's just dumb. I've never been a believer. But with that said, I did have this one time. Everybody tells me about it. And then they've all got one thing that they can't explain. And I go, and how does it feel when you think about that? And they're like, no, I really don't think about it that often. And I go, but it's fun when you think about it, isn't it? Just the possibilities. What if that really is what you had happen? What if there is more than just getting up, going to work, coming home, taking a shower, going to bed, and doing it all over again?
Yeah. At this point, we've got a few short minutes to go.
Sure.
Anything you would like to say to younger listeners who are intrigued by what you do, whether it's in the world of broadcasting or the material that you broadcast about? Anything that one would do to prepare for a career as a paranormal broadcaster that you would recommend?
I don't do it. It's tough. No. Here's what I would tell anybody that's interested, no matter what age you are. Don't walk in a place of fear. Fear clouds our judgment. Fear clouds our experiences. Had I always stayed in a place of fear after seeing that man appear in the window, then out in the front yard, then in the middle of the yard, then at the corner of the yard, I wouldn't be where I am today, and I would have missed so many rich opportunities. Yeah. So try not to walk in a place of fear. Try to walk in a place of understanding. And if something scares you, like you are knocked down by a ghost, it's easier for us to want to jump to the conclusion that it's something demonic. But what if it's just that ghost lashing out? It's so sad. It's so lonely. For so many years, people have come and gone and haven't heard them. And you're the first person that they got through to. And instead of running out the door, you turn and you say, I heard you. What can I do for you? Would you like me to pray for you? Would you like me to tell people your story? And then try to put that together. So for everybody out there, this journey that we're on is remarkable. And you could choose to look at all the horrible, bad, hateful things that are going on in the world, or you can look beyond them and realize that even in the worst moments of history, something comes from them and new things break through, and that we're okay. We're going to be okay. You just have to have faith that what the world brings to you is part of what you focus on. So if you're always focused on the negative, you're going to see the negative. But if you start focusing on the possibilities, the opportunities, you will see them when they happen, and they come by fast, and they might be fleeting, but you'll notice them. And then people will think you're just lucky, and that's okay too. So take advantage of those moments.
Would you please give us your website information again, where people can get the book, and where perhaps they can see you next in person.
I will be out this weekend at Hillview Manor in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, this Saturday. So there are tickets available at darknessevents.com. You'll see all the places I'm going to be this year. And you can keep up with me at paranormal60.com. That's paranormal60.com. You'll see everything I'm a part of and what I'm doing next.
Great. Dave Schrader, it has been a pleasure to spend this time with you. I look forward to continuing our dialogue as we move forward in life.
You got it, Peter.
Peter Robbins. The show is Meanwhile Here on Earth. My special guest tonight has been Dave Schrader. Stay well, fight for what you believe in, and we'll see you next week.